Hi, this is a tour of the St. Paul's audio system. There is a corresponding video that we'll link to in the description that is a screencast of the iPad that shows how the virtual mixer for this works. But this is a video tour to sort of explain the different pieces and how things work. So here's the rack. There it is. This is kind of important. These jacks here, they stick out, so you can't shut the door all the way. In a perfect world, you could shut the door all the way, but we don't live in a perfect world, so you don't want to shut the door and squish those connectors. So here we have everything. Let's start with the sound system components themselves. The power is in the upper right. You just flip that switch on and we're good to go. The iPad here lives here and is plugged in here. When it's not being used to do the virtual mixing, it should be sitting here plugged in. The iPad, I guess the most important thing to know is, oh, it wasn't locked, but the code for the iPad is 123456, super secure. Then we have some microphones here. There are two handheld microphones. When you turn them on, you can see the battery level indicator. Since there's only one of me doing the recording, I can't easily show, but to change the batteries, it takes two AA's. You unscrew basically where my hand is. I can almost do it with one hand, but this bit that I'm holding unscrews, and it's pretty obvious how to change the two AA batteries. We try to have a stash of AA batteries on top of the rack so that you have some. But you know, when you turn it on, you get the battery view, and if there's only one or two, like if there's one or even two lines, it's time to change the batteries. So that's handheld 1, handheld 2, same thing. This tabletop mic is configured as wireless 5 on the iPad. And we also have a little microphone pack that you would wear on your belt and that has either a lavalier or a headset. That's also wireless 5, but it's important to note that you can only have one of those on at a time. You can either have this tabletop mic on as wireless 5, or you can have the pack with the lavalier or the headset on as wireless 5. You can't have them both on at the same time. And I'll talk about why that's the case just in a moment. Well, actually, I can talk about it right now. If we look at all the components in the rack here, let's look here at the wireless receivers, which is here and here. So this is one component that has 4 wireless receivers, and then that's a component that has the 5th. So wireless 1 and 2 are the handheld 1 and 2 that I just showed. Wireless 3 and 4 are the two packs used by pastor and Lisa typically, or the assisting minister, and wireless 5 is what I was just talking about. It is either the microphone that tabletop that I just put back there, or it's the pack. So maybe I should zoom out a little bit and talk about these components. The whole sound system, it's basically massively computerized, and it doesn't even have wires with normal audio signals between the components. It's a network. So that is a computer network. Those are RJ45 Ethernet jacks that all the components talk to one another. And in fact, between this rack and the big speakers, the main left and right speakers out in the nave, they're literally on the same network. So the sound travels over the network, not over traditional wiring, for what that's worth, if that's at all interesting to whoever's watching the video. So that's the first thing we see here. If we move down, we see this auxiliary input. This input right here is an 1/8" headphone style jack. It's stereo, and it's possible to plug something like an iPhone or an iPod. Does people still use iPods? Plug that in here as an input source and play it through the speakers, through the sound system. That's a use case that we can support. We tend not to do that here, but you can do it. And there's a physical toggle switch to control whether or not this jack is live. It's also controlled from the mixer. It is in the second. Let's bring this over here. Again, there's a separate YouTube video that's a screencast that goes into this in more detail, but as long as I'm talking about it. So on the second screen of inputs, 9 through 16, these two right here, aux rack left and aux rack right, those are the inputs that correspond to this right here, auxiliary. And then this is a level to control how the level of the particular input. Next down is this Denon digital recorder. It takes SD cards, like so, and up until the pandemic in March, April 2020, we had been recording the services on these SD cards and then uploading the audio to SoundCloud as a podcast. So this, for what it's worth, this recorder, my understanding is it was used in our former sound system. And when we got this sound system in 2017 or so, we asked the vendor to move it so we could continue recording and podcasting. We don't do that anymore. Now we've gone to video streaming and put things on YouTube, but we still have this video recorder here. It's not hurting anything. One thing to note, just as an explanation, back to the iPad. So these are the two inputs that I just talked about, the physical 1/8 inch input in the rack. Record in left and right. These two inputs correspond to the digital recorder. So as you can see, you can not only record on a digital recorder, you can play back something you had recorded on the SD card. And if you play through here, these two, record left and right, control the input. As a general rule, you can see these inputs are all muted. We don't use the auxiliary input in the rack on a regular basis, and we never use the input from the digital recorder. So these are just muted. These two guys right here, this is the actual guts of the sound system, the amplifier and the mixer. We'll skip over those because there are nothing to see here in terms of anything to configure. Oh, that's not true. Right here, this USB input is can be used. You can plug a USB stick in there, and then here, the recorder tab. We can record. Here is where you control recording onto a USB stick. We've never done that, I don't think, but it's supported. The vendor says it works, but we just haven't done it. So we actually have two ways we could record. We could record on our old Denon recorder, or we could, in theory, record on a USB stick. And then the final thing I want to talk about are these inputs and outputs here. So let's start on the left. So these are labeled rack mic 1 left, rack mic 2 right. These are XLR, which is meaningful if you know about audio stuff. They're XLR inputs. And these correspond to, if I go back, no, pardon me, they're right here. These correspond to what is labeled in the iPad, organ left and organ right. And here's why that's the case. So this cable right here, what a mess. This cable goes up to the organ gallery in the balcony. And I will show later in this video, there is a metal box with 4 XLR jacks. And those 4 jacks are wired to come down here. And we use up there, the jacks that are labeled 1 and 2 correspond to these. And plugged into those jacks upstairs, 1 and 2, are 2 mics that are on booms to pick up the organ. So even though they're labeled here, rack mic 1 left, rack mic 2 right, because they're almost basically permanently used for the organ, on the iPad, they're just labeled organ left and organ right. But the important thing to know is that those mics are plugged in rather, in the gallery to inputs 1 and 2 on that metal box, and they come straight down here where they go into these inputs. Now, those are inputs. These are outputs labeled aux out left and right, and these are quarter-inch outputs. These are balanced outputs, just like the XLR is balanced. If you're an audio person, you know the deal with balanced inputs and outputs. And you can see these, here we have a cable. It's quarter inch on one end, and it goes to XLR here on the other. And this right here that I'm tapping looks familiar. It's the same as one of these. So this is input 1 and 2, runs to the box up in the gallery. And this, as you can see, gallery number 3 and gallery number 4. So in this case, we're sort of running the signals in the other direction, if you will. What happens is this is output from the sound system that runs back up to that metal box to jacks 3 and 4, and this is the output for the streaming audio. So I'll talk more when I get up in the gallery about this, but the audio for the YouTube streaming that we do comes exclusively from the sound system, and it comes from these two outputs and runs through these white cables up to the gallery, where it then goes to the physical mixer. So more will be revealed when I show that stuff up there. But it's it's important to know that these inputs are from the organ coming from the gallery, and these outputs are from the entire sound system, and they go back to the gallery. And if we look at the iPad and I go to bus 1 through 8 is where the outputs are. I'm in detail. I need to be in the regular view. So this is bus 1 through 8. These are the outputs for the speakers, and then these two outputs here, aux out left, aux out right, these outputs correspond to those. And we keep those at just 0 dB on this virtual mixer, and we adjust the level if we need to anywhere else. So that is, I think, everything we need to talk about here in the robing room where the sound system is. Maybe it goes without saying, you just flip the switch and turn it on. You have to wait. It's a while. I believe it's over a minute for everything to boot up. And until then, you won't see any input here on the, if you use the, fire up the virtual mixing app, it won't connect, and therefore you won't get this view until the sound system is completely booted and up and running. This key right here, which is sort of not helpfully labeled, this key goes to the closet that is at the landing in the front staircase just down from the bathroom off the narthex. That key opens that closet, and as I will show you later in the video, in that closet are a bunch of XLR microphone cables and microphones and other miscellaneous stuff. There's not a regular reason to get into that closet because we don't typically need wired microphones, but the cable, or rather the key, is nevertheless here, and I did want to explain it. All right, I'm in the staircase here that goes up to the organ gallery, and I'm going down because I want to show the closet where we have microphones. So I have a key to this closet. There is also a key to it on top of the audio rack with a big red label on it, and that opens this closet. Typically, though, there's no reason to get in here, or there's no regular reason to get in here. What this is, don't worry about the stuff on the bottom. This is cables. These are cables. During the pandemic, we had a bunch of microphones on the nave floor to handle the choir, and so these are various lengths of XLR microphone cables. Up here is various supplies, and you can see we have 6 pretty decent microphones rolling around in here. The main reason you'd want one of those microphones and one of these cables is to plug into the piano jack, which is the only wired jack we have with an XLR jack for the sound system. When we were using these during the pandemic, they were connected to the hardware mixer, which I either will show you or have already shown you depending on what order I cut all this together. I guess the last thing to show in here, this is the backpack case for the camera that is currently mounted on the tripod up in the organ gallery. There is another one of these backpacks with a camera in it. We have 2 cameras graciously on loan from the University of Maryland and 2 tripods, but that's just the empty case. All right, let's talk speakers. Here we have the main left speaker and the main right speaker. Also important to know is that there is a single speaker in the chancel right there, and that is most useful for the choir so that they can hear spoken word. I'll show other speakers in a moment in the narthex in the balcony, well, in the gallery/balcony. There they are. Oh, you can't really see them. The fans are blocking them. There you can see that one. There are left and right speakers in the gallery. They're not, however, controlled left and right. They're a single level controls both speakers. And then stand by, I'll show you the narthex. Narthex speakers. There's one here and there's one over there. These speakers had formerly, until the pandemic when we moved worship outside, they had been mounted up here. But I took them down and I spliced in, making any electrician proud, I spliced in, I think this is 50 foot of extra wire. And so now this speaker did the same thing over there, more extra wire. And in fact, this may be 100 feet of wire. I want to say that I have even more wire on this one because this speaker goes out that door and goes on the lawn over out that way. And then this speaker goes out that door and sits somewhere outside on the front steps. And then we get a lot of coverage for everybody outside. They can hear from the front steps all the way over to out closer to the sign, or not the sign, the temporary sign and the picnic table. Also, it's worth noting, you can see the hardware is still there. I put it back. So if somebody ever decides they want to mount these speakers again, there's just some threaded holes here, and those are the bolts necessary. All the hardware is there. They can easily be mounted back up. You could undo those wire things and hook them back up. All right, so those are the narthex speakers. Also need to show we have some trip hazard preventers. Looks like there's only 2 of them here. They're sort of scattered throughout the building, unfortunately. But it's important that when these speakers get put outside, you have to make sure that there's trip protection so that somebody doesn't trip, because the wire has to run from there to the door, and it has to run from that speaker out that side door. So that's important to either tape the wire down with gaffer tape, or those rubber covers. So those are all the speakers. Now let's talk inputs. Most of the microphones are wireless. As I was just talking about, there are 5 wireless microphones, 2 handhelds, 3 of those packs with lavaliers or headsets. But then remember, number 5, there's also that tabletop microphone. That's wireless channel 5, and it's got to either be that one or the wireless pack on, only one at a time. Then we have a physically wired mic in the lectern. And then there is a jack that's labeled piano, and it's right there. It even says piano. So this piano microphone, we tend not to use. We just don't have a use case for it. But it's on the iPad. It's just sort of semi-permanently muted. And you can use it for the piano or whatever. It works. And here we are up in the organ gallery to talk about the other end of things that we use for YouTube streaming. And earlier in the video, I referred to the metal box with the 4 jacks that you can see is labeled mic 1, mic 2, mic 3, mic 4. Mic 3 and mic 4, strictly speaking, that's not correct. They're not mics. Let me describe that again. But mic 1 and 2 correspond to these 2 mics on booms that are used to capture the organ up here. So in the iPad, they're labeled organ left and organ right. So that's these 2. And you may recall from earlier in the video, these 2 inputs go down and terminate near the sound system rack, and then they plug into the rack. Then you may recall that there's an aux out left and an aux out right in the rack. They come up to 3 and 4. So even though these are labeled mic 3 and mic 4, they're not, in this case, these are not microphones. These are not inputs. 3 and 4 are outputs. So this is the output from the sound system running up here. It runs along the floor, and it runs to the hardware mixer. So the history of the hardware mixer, we got this during the pandemic when the choir was stretched out in the 2 side aisles, and we had several microphones, 3 on each side, on stands, spread out, and they went into the hardware mixer, and that allowed us to capture the choir singing even when they were spread out in the nave. Now that we are mercifully back worshiping as normal, we no longer need all those microphones. We still have this hardware mixer, and we're using all this mixer basically for one purpose. We're taking input from the sound system and we're sending it out USB right here, USB to the laptop. So the mic 3 and mic 4, which are really not microphones, remember they're outputs, they come to here. So, well, I can't pull those up, but I want to show that those are, there we go. These are XLR cables, and those XLR cables, that's 3 and 4 from the jack over there. And then this is just a converter that goes from XLR to 1/4 inch TRS, pardon me. So on the mixer, for what it's worth, inputs 13 and 14 work as a stereo pair. So don't want to belabor the point, but it's important to understand that this is the left and right channel from the sound system, coming from the sound system rack down there. Well, I don't know why I'm pointing there, you can't see the door, but running from the it's called, I think, aux out left and right, comes up to those jacks there, comes over to here, then the mixer converts it to USB, and that's this cable right here, and it goes into a USB hub, and it goes into the laptop. We have separate instructions for how to do the laptop and streaming, so I'm not going to go into detail here, but I did want to point out the how that works. Let's talk a little bit about how video works. So video uses these guys here. This is a slick little contraption that was like 20 bucks on YouTube, and it is HDMI on one end and USB on the other. Well, here's a new one still in the box. So this is how we go from a camera with HDMI to USB into the laptop. So we use the OBS software on the laptop to combine audio from the mixer coming in over USB and video from the cameras coming in over USB. During the year when we're inside, we use just a single camera like this with one of these HDMI to USB. When we're outside, we need to use a different solution because the run for the camera is far too long for an HDMI cable. So we have these guys. Now this is not connected at the moment, but we have an HDMI transmitter and a receiver. And now through the magic of a jump cut, we have both a transmitter and a receiver. So these two boxes work as a pair, and their job, here's the transmitter. Transmitter. So this takes HDMI in, this would be connected to a camera somewhere far away, and then in here would be a regular old RG45, which takes a Cat 5 or 6 cable, and then that runs here. This one has the Cat 6 cable plugged into it. This is the receiver, and this just turns the signal that had been sent over the twisted pair cable back into HDMI. And then this would be hooked to one of these, just like that. And then we would have another input, or if we're outside, that would be the primary input. It's important to know that we have these guys, transmitter and receiver. So obviously this transmitter normally then would be outside, connected to the outside camera. The other end of this very long RJ45 cable would then be here. So this would be outside, broadcasting from here over the blue cable to here and then into the laptop. So speaking of that blue cable, it goes down here, which is a pipe chase, and it comes out down there. At the moment, the blue cable snakes all the way to the front of the church where it's coiled up, and we can use a second camera to capture the baptistry if we want, which we do some of the time, but we also use it, and then we run the same long blue cable. Oh, trust me, there's a long blue cable. We run it the other way, down through the door and outside, and that's how we have an outside camera. Behind the table with the laptop and the hardware mixer, we have another camera and another tripod. So another camera in there, and also we have another HDMI cable. And these are the ones that this camera and that tripod are used outside on a Sunday morning. When we're having services outside, use this camera and this tripod because that allows this one to just stay in place.